What happens when a comedian celebrated for her warm, family-friendly style sits across from one of television's most provocative hosts tonight? We look at the exchange that led Leanne Morgan to leave mid-interview, leaving Andy Cohen in quick damage control mode. The setup seemed ideal for a fun, easygoing promotional chat. Leanne Morgan, the Tennessee-born comic, was there to promote her latest special, a tribute to family, motherhood, and small-town humor. Andy Cohen, known for mixing light banter with sharp questions, came prepared with his usual mix of playfulness and provocation. Initially, the mood was upbeat. Andy greeted Leanne with his signature grin, joking about her hectic schedule balancing tours, marriage, and grown kid who still call home for everyday advice. Leanne responded with her trademark laugh and charm. But as the conversation went on, Andy's tone began to shift. So, Leanne, he said, leaning forward with a familiar spark in his eye, your comedy focuses a lot on traditional family life in small towns. Do you ever think that might seem outdated to younger audiences? Leanne's smile faltered slightly. I don't believe love, family, or community ever go out of style, she replied steadily. My stories come from my background, but the emotions, love, humor, chaos, are universal. Whether you're in Tennessee or New York, raising a family is funny and complicated everywhere. Andy nodded, but there was a subtle edge beneath it. Right. But don't you think that with your growing platform, you also have a responsibility to recognize that not everyone fits into that traditional family mold you focus on? Some might feel left out of your comedy. The energy in the room shifted. Audience laughter faded into quiet tension. Leanne sat a little straighter. Andy, I'm not trying to exclude anyone. I talk about my husband, kids, neighbors, my life. That's what comedians do. I'm not telling anyone how to live. I'm just sharing my perspective. That's exactly my point. Andy pushed, his tone tightening. When you highlight only one kind of family as the center of your stories, it can sound like you're implying that's the right way, especially since you previously made remarks about traditional values being under threat. Leanne's expression hardened. The easy warmth was gone. I never said traditional values were under attack, she answered, her tone measured but firm. I said they matter to me and to my family. There's a difference between valuing your own way of life and criticizing others. Andy continued, but Leanne, let's be honest. Your entire image is built around being the wholesome mom from Tennessee. You talk about marriage, gender roles, homemaking. At what point do we admit that traditional can sometimes be exclusive? That's when Leanne cut in. Andy, I need you to stop right there, she said, calm but firm. The studio went silent. You're twisting everything I've said into something it's not. I won't sit here while you try to make me out to be judgmental just because I share stories about my family. Andy blinked, taken aback by her sudden firmness. Leanne, I'm not twisting anything. I'm asking real questions about the impact of your message. Leanne repeated, her voice rising. See, that's a problem. Andy, I don't have a message. I have stories. I have a life. I talk about what I find funny. My kids' dirty socks, my husband forgetting the trash, my mother-in-law's casserole disasters. I'm not running a campaign. I'm telling jokes. The audience sat in total silence. And he kept pushing, unaware he'd crossed a line. But when you joke about traditional families, Leanne, that's still a statement, whether you mean it or not. People can feel left out by that. Leanne let out a small, disbelieving laugh. Excluded? You know what actually exclude people. Andy, telling them their experiences only matter if they fit someone else's idea of what's acceptable. That's exclusion. That's not what I'm saying, Andy replied quickly, his confidence wavering. Then what are you saying? Leanne shot back. Because it sounds like you're implying that just because I love my husband and kids and talk about it on stage, I'm somehow responsible for how other people feel about their lives. That's not comedy. That's you looking for a fight, and to force a nervous smile, trying to regain control. I'm just asking tough questions. Leanne. She interrupted firmly. You're not asking, you're accusing. You're taking something light and genuine and twisting it to stir controversy. And that's not fair. A stunned quiet filled the studio. Leanne's tone had shifted completely, no longer playful, but resolute. I came here to talk about family and laughter, she said, rising to her feet. And you turned it into a debate about politics and inclusion. That's not my kind of comedy. I don't tear people down. I make them laugh. Andy's eyes widened. Leanne, wait, but she was already removing her microphone. No, Andy, I'm done. You wanted a headline. You got one. She walked off without another word. The studio remained silent for several seconds before Andy turned to the camera with an uneasy smile. Well, he said, voice faltering slightly, that was unexpected. What began as a light interview just turned into one of the most surprising exchanges we've seen on late-night TV. Andy leaned forward, now serious but composed. I think there's a misunderstanding here, he said. There's a difference between celebrating your own life and presenting it as the ideal for everyone. Leanne raised her brows, her voice cooling. And when exactly did I do that? Andy, show me one example where I said everyone should live like me. One joke, one story, one line where I told anyone how to run their lives, their families, or their relationships. The audience went silent again. The air thickened as Andy paused, clearly searching for an example. He didn't have done. It's not always about what you explicitly say, Leanne, he finally managed. Sometimes it's about the overall narrative you're creating. Leanne blinked slowly. The overall narrative I'm creating, she repeated, her southern lilt now carrying an edge. Let me tell you something about narratives. Andy, she leaned forward, her voice tightening with conviction. 4 years, I performed in tiny clubs where no one knew my name. I told stories about feeling like a failure as a mom, about my marriage barely holding together, about wondering if I was good at anything. I made people laugh by sharing my insecurities and flaws. That's what connected us. Her voice strengthened, almost trembling with emotion. I've never claimed to have it all figured out or to live some perfect life people should copy. I just tell the truth, the messy, funny, human truth. And now you're telling me that's harmful? That being honest about my own life creates a toxic narrative. And he shifted in his chair, his polished demeanor cracking. But surely you see, he said carefully, that when someone with your platform celebrates certain lifestyles, it can come across as endorsing those choices over others. Leanne stared at him, her expression now steady and cold. Andy, do you even hear yourself? You're basically telling me I can't love my own life out loud because it might make someone else uncomfortable. Do you realize how backward that sounds? I'm not saying you can't love your life, Andy stammered. I'm saying there's a way to do it without marginalizing other people's experiences. Leanne let out a short, breathless laugh, part disbelief, part exhaustion. Marginalize? Andy, I tell jokes about burning dinner, missing PTA meetings, begging my husband to fix a garbage disposal. I talk about holding my life together with duct tape and prayer. How is that marginalizing anyone? The room was frozen. Andy looked down, then up again, but Leanne pressed on. You know who I perform for, she continued. Truck drivers, teachers, nurses, single moms, factory workers, people just trying to get through the week with a bit of laughter. Those are my people. That's my community. Her voice steadied into a calm, firm tone. And now you're telling me that my stories, their stories, don't count because they don't match your version of what's acceptable. Andy opened his mouth but had nothing to say. The studio lights hummed. Cameras rolled. The crowd remained silent as Leanne leaned back, unwavering. You invited me here to talk about comedy, she said quietly. And somewhere along the way, you turned it into a lecture on what I'm allowed to find funny. That says a lot more about you than it does about me. And with that, Leanne Morgan stood, gave a polite nod to the. Leanne gave the audience a polite nod and walked off set, leaving Andy Cohen staring into the camera, visibly unsettled as a control room rushed to cut to commercial. Andy lifted his hand slightly, his voice softer. Leanne, I wasn't trying to attack your values. Her voice cut back, low but precise, the kind of quiet that carried more weight than yelling. Andy, she said evenly, you spend the last 15 minutes tearing down everything I believe in, all while acting like you're just asking questions. You question my integrity, my impact, and even my right to speak about my own life without apologizing for it. She stood abruptly. The movement was so sharp that several crew members froze, unsure whether to intervene. Under the studio lights, the MIC pack clipped to her blazer caught the glare as she turned toward Andy. You know what the real issue is here, Andy? She asked, her tone calm but cutting. It's not that I talk about traditional values or small-town life. The problem is that you surrounded yourself with so many people who think exactly like you. You've forgotten there's a bigger world out there, one that doesn't revolve around your perspective. Andy, clearly shaken, remained seated but straightened up. Leanne, please sit down. Let's talk about this rationally. Leanne let out a short, humorless laugh. Rationally? Andy, nothing about this has been rational. You invited me here to discuss my comedy special, and instead you put me on trial for the crime of being content with my own choices, though I was asking legitimate questions about the cultural impact of your work. Andy said weakly, his confidence fading to "No, you weren't," Leanne snapped. You were searching for a moment, something you could twist into a headline. You weren't after a real conversation. You were after content. The words hit hard. Andy opened his mouth but stopped when he saw her expression, not just angry, but disappointed. You know what's really sad? Leanne said softly, I came here excited. I thought this would be fun, just talking about family comedy, finding humor in everyday chaos. Instead, you turned it into an interrogation about whether my happiness is somehow offensive. She began unhooking her microphone, each motion deliberate. Andy, I built my career by laughing at real life. I've shared failures, insecurities, struggles, and yes, the good parts too. I've always been open about what works for me and my family, but I've never said it had to work for anyone else. She paused, holding the MIC pack in her hand, staring at it briefly before continuing. Apparently, in your world, that kind of honesty is dangerous. Apparently, being happy in a traditional marriage is something that has to be analyzed or challenged. Apparently, we can only celebrate our own lives if we apologize for them first. Andy rose slowly, realizing too late that control of the interview had slipped away. Leanne, I think you're overreacting. These are important discussions for society to have. Leanne tilted her head, her expression incredulous. Our society? Andy, you don't speak for society. You speak for your audience, your circle, and that's fine. But don't pretend that's the entire world. She stepped closer to his desk, her voice steady and clear. You want to know what I think society really needs? We need people who can genuinely enjoy their lives without apologizing. People who can celebrate their choices without tearing down someone else's. People who understand that there's space for many kinds of families, values, and stories. She placed the MIC pack gently on his desk with a soft click. But most of all, she added, we need fewer people who think it's their job to police others' happiness, to shame people for living lives that don't fit into some approved version of what's acceptable. Leanne took a deep breath. Her tone softened, not angry, but tired. I came here to talk about laughter. Andy. Instead, you reminded me why so many people are afraid to be honest about their lives. Not because they are ashamed, but because they are tired of being judged by people who preach tolerance while practicing the opposite. Andy stood frozen behind his desk, unable to respond. Leanne gave him one last look, her voice barely above a whisper. So, thank you for the reminder. With that, she turned and walked off stage. The audience remained stunned. Andy glanced toward the control booth, his face pale under the lights. No one spoke. The sound that finally broke the silence wasn't laughter or applause. It was a faint thud of Leanne Morgan's MIC pack against the desk, still vibrating. The soft echo carried more weight than anything Andy Cohen could have said next. Leanne's voice lingered in the air, steady and sure. Thank you, Andy. You just reminded me exactly why my comedy matters to the people who come to my shows. They are looking for someone who will tell them it's okay to love their lives, even when those lives don't match someone else's expectations. As Leanne reached the studio door, Andy called out, Leanne, wait! You're walking away from an important conversation. She stopped, hand on the handle, then slowly turned back, a faint, incredulous smile on her face. An important conversation, she repeated, stepping forward. Her voice was calm but sharp. Andy, you don't want a conversation. You want a confession. You want me to say that my happiness hurts other people, that I should apologize for loving my life. That a low murmur swept through the audience. Leanne glanced their way, her eyes fierce. You know what an important conversation would actually sound like, she continued. It would be about why we've reached a point in this country where someone can't share their joy without being accused of causing pain. Why so many people feel like they can't talk about their faith, their families, their values, without being labeled as backwards, hateful, or dangerous. She gestured toward the audience, many of whom were nodding, some with tears in their eyes. These are good people. They work hard. They love deeply. They build communities and raise families. And instead of celebrating that, our culture tells them to be quiet, that their happiness isn't the right kind of happiness. Andy stood still, his earlier confidence replaced by unease. That's not what I was trying to do, he said softly. Then what were you trying to do, Andy? Leanne shot back. Because from where I'm standing, it looked a lot like shame. You tried to make me feel small for being proud of my life, for finding human beauty in something you've decided isn't enlightened enough. The studio was silent, tension thick in the air. You talk about inclusion and tolerance, she continued, voice trembling with emotion. But your version of inclusion doesn't include people like me. Your version of tolerance doesn't tolerate those who find joy in tradition. Her voice broke slightly, but her gaze never wavered. Dio, you know how many women have come up to me after my shows, tears in their eyes, thanking me for reminding them it's okay to be proud of being a mom? How many couples told me my jokes about marriage helped them remember why they fell in love in the first place? These people felt like their lives didn't matter anymore, like their happiness was something to hide. Through laughter, I helped them remember there's nothing wrong with loving the life you've built, even if it's not trending online. Andy lowered his eyes. So when you question my work, she said firmly, when you imply that celebrating traditional values is harmful, you're not just criticizing me. You're insulting every person who's ever felt seen and validated by what I do. You're saying their joy is worth less than someone else's. Leanne turned to the camera, her voice softening but her conviction growing stronger. I won't apologize for that. I won't apologize for finding beauty in family, for celebrating lasting love, for laughing through the chaos and grace of everyday life. And I absolutely won't apologize for being happy. She looked back at Andy one last time. You want an important conversation? Start with an honest one, with yourself. Ask why someone else's happiness feels like a threat to you, because that says a lot more about you than it does about me. With that, Leanne walked out. The studio stayed frozen in stunned silence. Andy Cohen stood behind his desk, the lights glaring down, producers whispering off camera. The door closed behind her with a quiet, final click.